Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Hagiyama, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to Be Your Own Hero. Uh, we are finally getting spring here in Southern California, and hopefully, we'll get some consistent weather. It has literally rained every week here for the last several months, and it's just crazy. But we had really nice weather over the weekend, and that's why people move here to Southern California. So it was really nice to enjoy that and take it all in because it was just absolutely gorgeous. Things are going well, and I hope things are going well with you as well. And I'm so happy to have Christine Handy, who we're going to shoot this as part two. And last week we showed you part one. So now we're going to continue on with this great conversation with this unbelievable person who I really enjoy. So, Christine, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get on with the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for having me back. I do have quite a long story, so it usually takes quite a while to share it. I am a mother, first and foremost. I am a model. I do a lot of work more now than maybe ever, but I've been modeling for 40 years. Right now, I'm modeling as a flat and concave advocate after my journey with breast cancer. So I walk in New York Fashion Week. I have modeled for Victoria's Secret as one of their breastless models. And I've worked with other amazing brands that also believe in the mission that I'm trying to do. But I'm also a public speaker. I am on the board of three nonprofits, which I love. I love serving. I speak in the prison system. I speak to women's groups. I speak in hospitals. I love my job because every single day I get to wake up and I get to inspire and give people hope. And so I'm also a writer. I have a book out called Walk Beside Me, and my book is currently being slated into a film. So
Wow.
my voice is spreading. It's a voice of hope.
That that's what I love about doing this is is to hear new things and things that are just so inspiring. And I commend you for all that you do and for who you are. And so that is just absolutely fantastic. So let's get this conversation rolling and start. We wanted to talk about you have a Harvard story, I understand. So why don't we start with that and get this thing rocking.
Well, I love my Harvard story because my modeling career started when I was 11 years old. And
Wow.
part of the impact that the modeling space had on me was I ultimately lost my self-esteem. If you think about the modeling space, not necessarily right now, because it's changing. The complexion of the modeling industry is changing. It's become much more inclusive. If I'm able to model at my age and with a concave chest, it's become more inclusive. When I was 18 or 19 or 20 at the height of my career, I thinking about a woman in her low 50s modeling with concave chest, I don't know that it would have happened. And so there's been great strides in the space, but I also took a lot of hits in the modeling space, and I'm not blaming it on that profession because it ultimately is our job to nurture our self-esteem, our self-talk, our self-love. And it's my character and it's my job to do that. Our inside is more important than our outside. But for so many years, my external value was more important to me than my internal. And so I was focused on my external value. I was focused on my hair, on my beauty, on my weight, and all the things that you think about when you think about modeling. And so after years and years and years of this and going to go sees and going to being submitted for jobs and a lot of times getting rejected, it takes a lot of courage to continue to have a solid self-esteem. Well, mine kept going down. So ultimately, prior to my diagnosis with breast cancer, my self-esteem was very low. And when we have a low self-esteem, we tend to, of course, I can only speak for myself, but I think in general, we tend to make different decisions than we would make if we had a really high self-esteem. Like I have an unstoppable self-esteem, which means that I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of getting cancer back. I'm not afraid of walking in New York Fashion Week. I'm not afraid of putting myself in front of people on great stages or in uncomfortable positions because I don't have that fear anymore. And that is based on my faith in God, but also based on the internal work that I did, the introspective work. And so now I'm able to make bigger and better decisions like Harvard. So what I did was after I was diagnosed with cancer and after I got through my treatment, I decided that I wanted to write a book. I felt like if I could go from having basically no self-esteem to an unstoppable self-esteem through a cancer diagnosis, through introspection, through faith, through friends who never forsake me. And that's how I got to that place. Then surely if I shared my story, that possibly could teach somebody else how to do it. And so I decided that I would write a book. I've never been trained to write. I've always loved to write. So I took it upon myself. I wrote the book. I published the book. Well, it was published by a publisher. Somebody published the book. Morgan James published the book. And after my book was published, I had chemo brain after chemotherapy. Chemo brain exists. It happens to a lot of people. It tortured me for years. It did not help my self-esteem because my cognitive skills were impacted. My memory, my short-term memory was impacted. And so I talk about this a lot, but sometimes I would drive down the road. And if I was taking a turn, if I was going left and there was no cars on the road, then I couldn't remember which side to drive on. That's the impact it had on me. And so I would be afraid to drive, right? It would put me in a position where I was fearful. And so I decided at that point, after I had some mishaps with doctors and I had lost some trust with some people in the medical profession, not my oncologist, but other people, then I decided that it was my job to fix it. I was not going to depend on a pill or somebody's advice, or I was going to do it myself. And so I thought if I went back to school, then maybe I could fix the impairment that I was experiencing from chemo brain. So I decided that I wanted to be more of a writer. And because I was not trained as a writer, I decided, well, I should go into a creative writing and literature program. So I looked for a creative writing and literature program as a master's. So I applied to Harvard University with chemo brain, and they accepted me. Now, there's two really important parts of the story. Well, maybe more than that. One, I wasn't afraid to apply to Harvard. I wasn't afraid of the rejection of them saying no, which was a complete 180 from how I had felt prior to my diagnosis, because I would have been afraid. I would have said to myself, well, what if they reject you? I don't want to put myself in that position. But if you really aren't afraid of rejection, then you will shoot for the moon. And if it doesn't accept you, it doesn't matter. So I applied to Harvard. They accepted me. And I struggled. I struggled. And by the way, I was in and out of the hospital for part of my time during my program, the master's program at Harvard in creative writing and literature, because I had a MRSA infection in my implant. And I was in the hospital in March of 2020, April 2020, and June of 2020. And so during that time in the hospital, I knew at that point that I couldn't really stop my life because I'd been in the hospital so much during treatment that I just kept continuing. I had projects that were due. I had to do it in front of my class because it was online at the time. So I would literally be doing my Harvard projects from a hospital bed with an IV in my arm.
Wow.
And for my entire class to see. So I was struggling with chemo brain. I'm in the hospital for a MRSA infection in my chest, and I'm doing my presentations. And even in my classmates were just, I think that provided some insight to them, right? Maybe taught them courage and bravery and putting yourself out there. And so I did, I was able to complete the program, and it did change my brain. And so the lessons for me were, one, you can't be paralyzed by fear, because chemo brain does paralyze people because they're afraid to put themselves out there. What if they were afraid to make a wrong decision when they're driving? And so that changed the trajectory of my life, being unafraid, and also to put myself in a position to change the outcome of what was happening to me because of other issues, right? Chemo brain is a product of chemotherapy. And so instead of being a victim and saying, well, I can't believe this happened to me, I can't believe now I have to deal with this issue, I decided I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a vine. I'm going to fix it myself, and I'm going to show other people how I fixed it. And maybe that could lead them to fixing other things in their life. So that is my Harvard story. And now I don't have any chemo brain.
That is incredible. Absolutely incredible. I just really admire your perseverance and your courage and your,
Maybe
hey, I'm gonna do it. I love how you just do it your way. I mean, that is so fantastic, and I love that. And at what point did you change to, I mean, because you struggled with all these self-doubts and emotions, and then it just turned, and all of a sudden you're this unbelievable, unstoppable force. How exactly did that happen?
Well, when you depend on the world and you depend on other people to fill you up, to satisfy you, and you depend on things, material things, and you depend on your beauty or you depend on external values, and those things get slowly but surely pulled away from you, right? My beauty left because I went through chemotherapy. I ended up getting a divorce from my husband. So that relationship ended. And so I had all these false idols in my life. I had all these strongholds. And ultimately, all the strongholds that I kept clinging to, they all left. The materialism, the self, the thirst for other people's approval, it all went away. And when you get to a place where you don't have those things anymore, you have to figure out some footing or you're quit. You won't survive it. So I could either go back to that footing by finding somebody else to replace my husband and finding other material items or finding a different external beauty or other things that maybe aren't as healthy. I decided, okay, I'm going to do it differently. It was a very cognitive choice. I did not want to go back to that world. I did not want to go back to depending on society. It didn't work for me. I tried it for 40 years and it didn't work. I was miserable. I was the unhealthiest person that I knew. I had no predisposition to cancer. I was a self-proclaimed athlete. I was allergic to sugar. Why was I unhealthy? My mind was unhealthy. My body was unhealthy because of all these false idols. That didn't cause the cancer, but in my mind, I was unhealthy. And then I was sinking fast in this quicksand of self-doubt and insecurity and being a victim. And I finally just said, okay, I surrender. I can't take that pressure anymore that I was inflicting basically upon myself. And I said, I'm going to be dependent on something else. And that was God. Now, I've now decided I'm going to be dependent on God. So now I'm praying and I'm.
So let me stop you there. When
Yeah.
exactly did that happen? Because I've never seen somebody go so far in one direction and then just boom,
It was
go the
extreme.
other direction. Yeah,
It was extreme.
how and when did that happen? Because I'm fascinated by that.
Well, it was extreme. It was extreme. And I probably imagine it's happened to other people, but a lot of people won't talk about it. This is where the vulnerability comes in, right? So many people won't share their stories because of that fear, that embarrassment. I tell people all the time, I was addicted to materialism. I had to have the right bag. I was addicted to other people's opinions of me. That's not flattering, but I'm able to share it in a way that is truth and in a way that gives people hope because there's a lot of people like that, but it didn't work for me. And so I want to teach other people why it doesn't work because it is quicksand, And so it happened during chemotherapy. I went through 15 months of chemotherapy and I say to myself all the time, I needed 15 months because I needed so much transformation. I needed so much introspection. And when I was going through chemotherapy, I was violently ill. And so I was on the floor all the time. I was in the bathtub trying to eat because the only place I could eat was in the bathtub because it was warm. There was warm water. And so all of that time, although I had a lot of friends and a lot of community that helped me, A lot of that is alone time. And so what I decided to do during that alone time was fill my mind with ways that I could live a different life. Became a choice for me, an intentional and a focus. So I took all the outside other focuses away and I said, okay, if I can't have those, or I'm not going to go back to that, what can I go back to? And then I started to pour myself into faith, and I started to pour myself into what thoughts am I thinking about myself? And they were very kind thoughts. I disappointed myself. But instead of criticizing myself, I started to say positive affirmations. And ultimately, even though I didn't believe them at first, I believed them. And that does rebuild your self-esteem. So it wasn't overnight. It was months and months and months, but I was able, and most people wouldn't say this is lucky, but in many ways, I was lucky to have 15 months of no work. I was completely covered with people helping me raise my children. Now, of course, I was sicker than I'd ever imagined I'd be in my entire life. But I used that time, that emotional space, to work on myself. And so that's when it happened.
So that brings me to my next question is, how do you look at you getting cancer? What did that mean to you? And how did it change your life?
Well, I felt great happiness prior to my cancer diagnosis. I was very happy, but I don't think I felt a lot of joy. And now I am able to serve and to give people hope. That's joy. And I don't ever want to go back to the happy. I want to feel joy. And so it's selfish in a way. It's, I guess, in some way self-serving, although it does cost me, right? It costs me time, costs me resources, it costs me emotionally, because I talk about my story a lot. It's not that I'm immune to the feelings it brings up. I'm not immune to it. And so it comes at a cost. But I'm willing, like I'm willing to go back to Harvard to fix my brain. I'm willing to model in New York Fashion Week or in Miami Swim Week in a bathing suit at 52 because it helps people. Is it hard for me? Absolutely. Does it take a lot of courage? And do I ever run out of courage? Absolutely. But when I'm running out of courage, I depend more on my faith. I depend on more self-talk. I've taught myself how to get to a space of having an unstoppable self-esteem. It's not that it doesn't waver. Everybody's does. But, you know, when you learn, when you become kind of not so dependent on the world anymore, you look at the world differently. I mean, I look at people and their dependency on, and well, especially on social media, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I look at some people's posts and I go, that's a bigger fall. That's going to be a bigger fall. Because if you're here and and then you go, get ill or sick or something, that's a big fall. And that happened to me. I was like, well, I really need this bag and I really want this piece of jewelry, and because that's going to make me feel better. And the problem was it never did. And so it got costlier and costlier. And then when I lost it all, I was like, oh man, that was a big fall. And so I just think I feel bad for people that are dependent on the world, you know?
But that's what society
But they're
teaches
wrong.
us
But
from
society,
from a young age.
yeah, but society's wrong. And
I agree. I
billboards
agree.
are wrong, advertisements are wrong. I mean, I could go on and on. It's wrong.
No, I completely agree with you that we're being force-fed a narrative that, whoever they are, want us to believe, and they want us to fall in line in a certain way of thinking. And
Yeah.
it's so fantastic to see you're saying, forget all of that. I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it, in a way that helps people. And I just really, really admire that.
Thank you.
Your fearlessness and your courage to just, uh, I mean, you are a true example for so many people in so many um, areas. It's just, I truly commend you, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Can I give you one more story?
Absolutely.
A really, this is a really good one. So, so when I lost my chest in 2020 from a MRSA infection, I never woke up from breast cancer not seeing breasts. I had mastectomies, but I had implants. And so when I went through the MRSA infection in 2020, I obviously woke up with a concave chest, and that took many months of.
Can you explain that? What the MRSA infection
Yeah.
is?
So a MRSA, so MRSA infections, I don't know exactly what causes all MRSA infections. I had a staph infection in my left breast. I had a staph infection in my left breast cavity, and it adhered to my implant. Did it start with my implant? I don't know. They don't know. It didn't really matter. It got into my implant and would not go away. Unfortunately, I got the staph infection on March 25th of 2020. And so to be in the hospital on March 25th of 2020, there was nobody there other than COVID patients. They had sent anybody home that didn't have to be there. I was in the hospital because I had to be there. There were only a few patients on the floor that I was on. And at that time, March 25th of 2020, we wore gloves. We didn't have masks yet. It's so funny for me to go back to my Instagram stories because I'm like, oh, we didn't have masks at the time. But I try to use all of the situations that I'm put into to help other people. So I would be walking around the floor, mentoring the other patients in the hospital, going, I know it feels weird to be here during COVID. And I know, come to my room if you need some help, I'll help you. And so, I'd already rebuilt my self-esteem at that point, but they weren't, the infectious disease doctors, if you think about it, were never so popular in the history of infectious disease doctors than they were at COVID. So my infectious disease doctor would come see me at 3 a.m. because she didn't have time. She was dealing with COVID, and it had just come out 15 days before or 10 days before. And so ultimately that that staph infection that I had in my breast cavity, from the outside, it looked like it was cleared. And of course, I'm not a doctor. They tell me I'm fine. I say, okay, I'm fine. So they sent me home. A month later, the exact same thing happened. I end up in the hospital. They treat me for a staph infection. Very long story short. By June of 2020, the staph infections, when they're not treated properly, turn into a bigger infection. MRSA infection was the infection I got. It could have killed me. MRSA infections can be deadly if they reach your blood. So I have my MRSA infection in my chest. I have an emergency surgery in June of 2020 because the infection was in my chest for several months. It had eaten away skin. It had eaten away tissue, and there was no chance of reconstruction. So I went from breast cancer to implants to staph infection to MRSA infection. Ultimately, my breast cavity was completely excavated, and now I'm concave. So was it from breast cancer? Kind of. But really, the MRSA infection is what took the implants out. So then I go back to, months later, I go back to modeling, and that's obviously why I do it. That is kind of my MRSA infection story. That's kind of how I got it. But interestingly enough, during that time, well, after, right now I have a concave chest. That's a totally different dynamic than a breast cancer survivor with implants. So I say to myself, okay, well, here's the story that I want to talk about. I think I look great. I mean, I don't love the reality. It's not what I would have chosen, but I'm like, I can handle it. This is how I look. This is what I'm supposed to look like right now at this stage of my life. And so I start posting pictures and with tight fitted outfits on because I don't want to cover up anything in my life. I don't want to wear a prosthetic. It's a personal decision. I don't want to wear it. I have a lot of scars. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to hide who I am in any regard, emotionally, physically, period. And so I post a picture on social media within a tight fitted shirt. I can't even remember the picture. And that same exact week that I post this picture, I was hired by one of the largest lingerie brands in the world to be one of their models. That picture, somebody said to me, I think you're helping a lot of people, but I think you're disgusting. I think your chest is disgusting. Now, I'm way out there on social media. I have a big following. I have a lot of supporters. That does not make me immune to the haters. That does not make me immune to people that disregard what I'm trying to do or try to pull me down. And so I had, on one hand, this incredible modeling contract. On the other hand, I had somebody that was trying to hurt me. And I wrote a post about it and I said, which voice do you think I'm listening to? The incredible modeling contract I got, or am I listening to the person that's trying to pull me down? I'm listening. And my response, my post said, I'm not listening to either. Because I don't want to be dependent on the modeling contract. And I don't want to be dependent on somebody pulling me down. What I wanted to be dependent on is my faith. And people were like, I can't tell you how many times that post was reposted because people were like, well, of course she's going to pick the modeling contract. And I didn't. And I don't. It is my faith that I'm dependent on. Those two things, those highs and lows, I don't want to be anymore. I want to be sure-footed with my faith, period.
That I am just so, what's the right word? I am so touched by your conviction. Your conviction is phenomenal, and that is to be commended. Absolutely.
Those are good stories. You know why? You know why those are good stories? Because people can go, it becomes relatable. Like if I just say to people, you should build your self-esteem. You should work on not being dependent on society. You should fix your own chemo brain. They'll be like, what are you talking about? How do you do that? But if I say, this is how I did it, and these are the steps I took, and this is the outcome for me, then they can relate it to their life and that maybe they can apply it. But that's what the importance of storytelling. That's why we do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm seeing here is, you give back so much. And the interesting thing about when you give back is it comes back to you in so many different ways, in different directions. It's just mind-boggling. That's what's happened to me, and I know that's what's happened with you.
Thank you.
Is it? I love that. Absolutely love that. And so, yeah, let's talk more about you, the example you want to be for younger models coming up, and what do you have to say to them so that they don't fall in your same pitfalls?
Well, it's a great question. And I work on this a lot. By putting myself in this position. I work as a model. I'm a working model. I put myself in that position. Part of it is to showcase that beauty comes from inside. It has nothing to do with my scars or my concave chest. My beauty is internal. And if I can show up like that and work for big brands, then I'm showing the world that, right? Or whomever sees it. But when I'm going to New York Fashion Week or I'm modeling in Miami Swim Week, I'm surrounded by other models, which is a totally different dynamic than working for a brand and going on a photo shoot by myself, working with photographers. That's completely different. But if I'm showing up at New York Fashion Week and I'm working with 30 models and then working in 5 shows, that's 150 people. That's 150 models that I can serve, that I can mentor, that I can talk to. So what I typically do is I take all the opportunities as much as I can to use my story to say to the young models, hey, listen, I was a model at your age and it was great and I loved it and the opportunity and all these other things, but these are some suggestions to work on your self-esteem. Take a look at my story and look what I've done with it, because maybe, I can give you hope for things that you might go through in your life. And so I try to be not in a condescending way and not in a matronly way, but in a more relatable way, I was insecure when I was 18 years old, and maybe some of the biggest campaigns I ever got. I was probably the most insecure person ever in my life during those times. And so if I can say that to them, that opens up a conversation. And so many times they'll say to me, I feel really insecure. And it's amazing how many models are insecure. But and it's also amazing how much of the industry is rejection. Because if you go on 10 go-sees in a week or put in front of 10 different clients in a week, most of the 70% of them you won't get. So that's more rejection than acceptance, right? And so it does start to mess with your self-esteem because you're constantly being judged just by your external. So I open up the conversation with these other models, and then it makes them think, right? And so I'm trying to do that in the space on all the spaces that I'm working in the modeling industry, not just on photo shoots, which again, I don't have access to a lot of models on photo shoots, but in New York Fashion Week and also with social media, I can talk about those things.
So what are your thoughts on social media? You know, how do you use social media to effectively share your message? And what would you recommend to people?
Well, I get paid to do social media. So, but I won't take on any projects that I don't believe in the project or the product. I won't. And I've turned away money. I and I think long hard about what I take on because I have to be authentic to myself or that's going to destroy my self-esteem. I think social media has a place in this world. I'm sad at the abundance and the value that young women have to go through because of social media. I'm not ignorant to the fact that there are bullies on social media because they bully me. And that part of social media, I vehemently despise. But you cannot have one without the other, right? And so I do my best to be a light, always a light. I don't use my voice to be political. I don't vary from what I'm trying to do. I'm very focused on my mission and focused on what I preach. And and I think that's why people respect me on social media. I try to mentor young women. I would love to be in front of more young women because I think I should have a bigger voice with that community because I did it so wrong. I'm sad about some of the idols that people are putting in or focusing on because of social media. And I'm not going to bring up names of people and I'm not going to bring up organizations. And the best I can do on those situations is pray about it.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. And so what exactly is your mission?
I have a few.
No, but your main mission.
My mission is to serve. My mission is to if people say to me, what, give me a sentence about what you do. I provide hope and I serve. The capacity I do that in is deeply speaking about self-esteem. Because if I didn't have a strong self-esteem, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have gotten through cancer. I would have given up. I also live in chronic pain because of my arm. I would have probably been drawn to maybe unhealthy things, but I have so much respect for who I am and so much respect for the vessel that, God gave me that I don't want to do any harm. In saying that, there's always decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, and even in relationally with me, I have to be very careful of my self-esteem because it can get slaughtered out there in the world, right? That's again, I talk about that a lot. So self-esteem is one thing I talk about all the time. Self-worth, self-love, and teaching people how to do that. First, it starts with your self-talk. Then it starts with what you put in your brain, with what you're listening to, with what music you listen to, what TV shows you have on, what news you have on, and all those types of things. So I think self-worth, self-talk, and, being an advocate for yourself is most of my mission.
So how do you refocus that on a daily basis?
Well, one thing when I started doing what I do, I said, I don't want to be put in a box of breast cancer because my story is much bigger than breast cancer. I had a doctor bully me, which is why I have chronic pain in my arm. I have had other health issues. I've had other self-esteem issues because of my profession. So I don't want to be put in this like, okay, Christine Handy, she's a breast cancer speaker. I want to be a speaker I want to champion for women. And so how do I not get in a box is I advocate for lots of other things. So for instance, I speak out about Iranian women right now. And people will call my publicist and say, I want a clip. I want a 3-sentence clip from Christine Handy on her opinion on this or her opinion on that. And it's not always related to breast cancer. And I like that because I want to be a voice for women. I don't want to be just a voice for breast cancer. And so I do it by certain interviews. I do it by podcasts. I do it by posts. I do it in social media. I do it by what I write. That's how I stay away from being put in a box.
That is awesome. And you are such a bright light in a dark room, and your message is truly awesome. And I will, you know, share your story with, you know, everyone because I mean it is just so awesome. Absolutely awesome. So what would you like to leave our audience with as far as a final thought?
Well, some people ask me that they say to me, well, you have such a big voice. You can inspire many. And what I say to people all the time is it just takes one person. Smile at somebody, engage with somebody, offer somebody hope, write somebody a letter. Everybody has a voice. You don't have to be a voice for thousands or millions. You can be a voice for one, and that saves a life. It changes a life. And so some people don't want to try because they think they won't have an impact. If you impact one person, that's all it takes.
I couldn't I couldn't have said it any better. In fact, you basically said my closing. So, but that is what is so beautiful about you is your spirit and your confidence and your willingness to help others. It is just so fantastic. And Christine Handy, I thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and continued success. And I hope that you help, you know, millions and millions of people throughout the world, which I know you will.
Millions
And
more. Love it.
yes, absolutely. It's so fantastic. And
Thank
I'd
you.
like to leave everyone with a couple of quotes. And the first one, these are from Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And the first one is tackle life with abandon. Go all out and hold nothing back. Your self-confidence will draw results. And that's exactly what you do, Christine. And then also the second one is stand up to any defeating lack thoughts and tell them to get out of your mind. Keep it positive and live your life the way you want to live it, not the way somebody else wants you to live it. And do your best to help spread positive uh, thoughts to people. Give them a smile, like Christine said. Uh, Help people out, because that's the only way this world is going to get better, is if we all band together and help to make it better. It just is not going to happen on its own. And so with that, make the most out of every single day. Your health is literally everything, as we know. Make the most out of every hour, every minute, and every second of every day. Every day is just so awesome, and it's such a blessing. Have a fantastic week, and we will see you next week on To Be Your Own Hero. Thank you so much, Christine, and you have a great week as well.